morning, this is Daybreak and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Daybreak, the SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. Starting off with the event which happened yesterday at the Uhuru Gardens, where President William Ruto led the country to mark its 60th birthday. And Kenya is on the right track, the head of state said, and that the country is out of danger and the economy is on stable footing. Among the component areas of his speech included the economy. He said the difficult and painful sacrifices have pulled the country from the brink of death distress. On taxation, he said that the government's measures, including the housing levy and the removal of subsidies, were necessary. On corruption, he vowed to support the war against graft, saying no shilling shall be lost through theft and embezzlement. On unemployment, he said the housing plan was deliberate measure and systematic for job creation mechanism. And also on opening the Kenyan borders, he said that beginning next year, Kenya will be a visa-free country, easing travel for visitors globally. Those stories are highlighted also on the other pages of the publications. We'll be taking stock of the 17-page speech by the President with Honorable Geoffrey Ruku, who is the Mbeere North Member of Parliament. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you. Your time is appreciated. Suba Churchill is the Executive Director, the Kenya National Civil Society Center. Thanks for your time. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. Honorable Bill Okero is the former Mandera County Senator, political economist. Thanks for your time. Much appreciated, Honorable Okero, for your time. Shortly, we'll be joined by Javas Bigambo, who is governance commentator. Gentlemen, speech that had vast areas in terms of its scope, touching on the rule of law, governance, the economy, corruption. Starting with you, Honorable Bill Okero, what do you make of the President's speech yesterday, coming against the backdrop of concerns and mounting anxiety across the spectre of the public over the cost of living, the squeezed household budgets, the value of the shilling in their pockets, and largely what appears to be a stagnated economy?
Well, I think the President's speech clearly was punctuated with positive vibes. I would expect him to do that, because as a leader, they say a leader is a dealer in hope. Even when the times are bad, you have to give a positive outlook, so that the citizens are reassured. And I think that's what the President has done. The reality, however, is different. But I think looking back at 60 years, I'm more concerned about the things he didn't say more than the things that he said. Because 60 years ago, when we got independence, there are things we said we are going to do. We are going to fight illiteracy, we are going to fight poverty, we are going to fight disease. Whether we have achieved that in 60 years, and you'll find, of course, there is always it's a mixed bag. For example, in literacy today, this country boasts nearly 80% literacy rate among the young people in this country, which is positive. So strides made in education, for instance. But when you look at disease, nearly 200,000 Kenyans dying every year. Some of the basic diseases like diarrhea and malaria and basic communicable disease. When you look at poverty, still close to 40% of Kenyans experiencing severe hunger. So I think we haven't done pretty well, and that is mainly in the economy. That's where the well-being of Kenyans is measured, is the economy. I think that's an area we have not done well. But I think, in general, I would say 60 years down the road, the general picture that he gave of how we have performed the historical part, I think is a positive thing. But on the outlook, where the situation is, where we are economically, I think that one we may not all agree on what he said. The reality is different.
And Churchill, coming to you, and on the economy, he talked about the trajectory you ought to have taken after independence, citing the examples of Singapore and Malaysia, and also other countries that today have progressed economically. And that largely points to a deficit in terms of leadership, is it? And that saying his administration therefore bears the ultimate responsibility in contemporary Kenya to course correct the economic situation of the country.
Exactly. The President's speech, of course, sought to inspire us but there's a sense in which it didn't echo with the struggles that Kenyans go through on a day-to-day basis. The president, of course, has been very, very firm in his position that we are on a recovery trajectory. But as long as that does not reflect on the day-to-day lives of people, as long as taxes remain high, I think that the president's speech did not get any soft landing at all, because Kenyans have in the last couple of months, in fact, the better part of the 1 year that His Excellency William Ruto has been president, they have had to live by sheer hope and believe that at some point things will get better. But in terms of the president's account of what as a country we have achieved, of course, being one of those that were born in the 70s, I remember we used to walk long distances to look for clinics. At times you were down with malaria. Today's life expectancy in Kenya is 67.47% years, compared to 1950 when, the life expectancy in the country was 41. Only reaching, 50 in 1962, and thereafter in 2010 reaching, the 60-year mark, and we have seen it increase over time, which is a good thing. But you also know that according to the United Nations Department for Economic and Social Affairs, 55% of Kenya's urban population live in informal settlements, the slums. Informal settlement is a better way of calling them, but they're actually slums. Will be there in, Dandora or Kawangware or wherever, and those slums continue to expand and increase in numbers. And that is an indication of, the growing gap between the rich and the poor. And the president having been in power, there's this notion, and I'm sure Mheshimiwa will want us to believe that notion, that President William Ruto took over in 2022. President William Ruto succeeded himself, having served as deputy president for 10 years. And so if indeed he had ideas that are meant for improving the lifestyle of the Kenyan people, we ought to have seen signs of those ideas in the 10 years that he was deputy president. And now that he's at the helm, not just second in command, but at the helm, would want to see him, pull himself by the bootstraps, literally, to ensure that, his speech resonates with the Kenyan people. But going by the last 1 year that he's been in power, we Kenyans are increasingly getting this notion that President William Ruto is insensitive to their hurtings, somehow has come up with very cruel policies and bordering on callousness. And I think he has a lot of work to do to get rid of that notion that is somehow heartless and has no feelings and is completely embedded with the Bretton Woods institutions to a point where even as he talks about Pan-Africanism out there, that sounds hollow to Kenyans, because we know that back at home he has employed, and those in charge of Treasury are some of the former employees of those Bretton Woods institutions.
We'll be talking about the taxation regime and the policies thereafter and how this is having an impact in terms of the economic growth. But fair to him, he yesterday pointed out on paragraph number 12 of his speech that admitting 6 years ago we certainly were far from where we were today. The progress he said we made is undeniable. Our peers at the time, nations like South Korea, Singapore and Malaysia, have similarly made immense progress in democratic and institutional maturity. They have, however, made much more economic progress than us, and as a consequence they are much more advanced than today. It seems to be laying responsibility on the pathway of Kenya's political establishment post-independence, and he has been that that political process. I mean, he has been present as an MP, as a cabinet minister, as a deputy president, and now as the commander-in-chief. Seems that Kenya's political establishment appears to be resonating with the very same mess that they have created in this country of why we are at the moment unable, for example, to fix our healthcare system and largely our education system, and also the question of political stability.
Exactly, and that's what I'm talking about, that having been all that, you know, member of parliament, cabinet minister, deputy president for 10 years, I think he has been in politics for the last, 30 or so years. And so if we were to rely on his speech and inspiration that, we keep on the trajectory that he has kept all that, we are on agreement on that. But is it for our president to lament, just like every other Kenyan? We have put him in that position, and the outcome of the 2022 elections indeed thrust him in that position. Okay. So we expect him to do more. But what we have seen, and that for me is the gap, is that as he inspires us to be positive, to look forward to a better Kenya, okay, what we see is a bit of extravagance on the limited resources that are being, extracted literally. That government today, there are people in this country that liken it to an extractive industry. Okay,
we'll talk about that because it's all about the taxing question on the economy. Honda Baruko, coming to you. What do you make of the president's speech to the country yesterday, much less with hope, and one that had inspired hope in the hearts of Kenyans?
Thank you. Indeed, President's speech was one of the great speeches he has made so far in his 1 year in office. One, to outline what his administration has achieved, and also to outline what his administration is trying to do in the coming future or in the coming year, especially when we are going to the new year. And to be honest, if we are talking about the 60 years from the time Kenya gained independence, if there are people who need to apologize to Kenyans, is anybody who has ever been a member of parliament from 1960, from 1963 to now. Yeah. But also at the same time to say thank you, or to say thank you to those who have been at the top for their service. That is President Kenyatta, Jomo Kenyatta, President Moi, President Kibaki, President Uhuru, and now President Ruto for their service to the nation. But for those who have been members of parliament, they need to apologize to Kenyans, because that platform, that premium platform, where Kenyans sent their representatives to go and try and shape the way things are done in the country, they have failed Kenyans in a big way. Because that platform is extremely premium in terms of affecting the way things are done. For the countries which we keep on mentioning about South Korea and other Malaysian or Asian tigers, who we were at the same level in 1963, it's because of the hard decision which their leaders made, difficult decisions. The integrity about the leadership, making decisions which are going to put proper work ethics, to ensure we fight any corruption, to ensure the resources of a nation are properly utilized. Today, that is exactly what President Ruto is trying to do, to make very painful decisions which are not popular with Kenyans. It would be very easy for the president to say, we are not going to increase taxes, we are not going to lower the borrowing rate, we are going to move with speed in the same way of borrowing, probably renegotiate our international obligations, like payment of euro. It would be very easy. Those are easy decisions to make. But he is making very difficult decisions so that our economy can be able to stabilize, our economy can be able to take the right trajectory. Our sharing can be able to have the correct value, not a value which is managed by the central bank. Okay? So these are difficult decisions, and we need to appreciate the president and his administration for for the decisions which they are making, which are painful now, but in the near future, we'll be able to see the fruit of some of these decisions.
Okay. We'll be talking about that because the controller of budget, Dr. Margaret Nyakango, also had pointed out what she termed as budgeted corruption. We'll be talking about that, even as she talked about difficult economic decisions to be made and the consequences this has, and the admission that you have made of how Parliament has failed the Kenyan people, it being the very guardrail of our democracy in holding the executive and having other, of course, obligations, including even the highest authority it can exercise of having the power to impeach a sitting president in our dispensation. Javas, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Thanks for making time for the broadcast.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation.
Asante sana. The head of state yesterday gave a lengthy speech of about 17 pages. This is the extract from the president's speech, largely touching on governance, the question of the economy, and also other spheres of areas where he had touted his administration and also the previous ones in terms of the accomplishments made. But there certainly are gaps in terms of our politics, in terms of our economy, in terms of our social structure. How can that be best fixed by a generation of political elite who apparently appear to be detached from the taxpayer?
Well, thank you so much, Ayub. First, it is a trite canon of governance and leadership that the president, head of state and government, must apprise the country constantly and periodically about the state of affairs of governance, the policies that he is routing for or implementing for the greater good and benefit of the people. And even as we reflect on the president's remarks yesterday, 60 years since independence, it may be helpful for us also to appreciate the past 4 epochs, as has been mentioned by Mheshimiwa here, that have ruled this country. The Jomo Kenyatta regime, the Moi regime, the Kibaki regime, the Uhuru Kenyatta regime, and now the 5th, the William Ruto regime. But also the past 12 parliaments, and now the 13th, the kind of policies and pieces of legislation, approaches to governance that they have overseen. And Mheshimiwa here, including Mheshimiwa Bill Okero here, have been members of the August House at various times. And because of the decisions and actions or omissions of the various arms of government, the judiciary, parliament, and the executive, it has led us to where we are today. Of course, we appreciate the broad thematic areas that the president spoke to yesterday: matters economy, taxation, corruption, unemployment, and even matters international relations, through the issue of removal of the visa requirement. But we must also be alive to the fact that as we marked the day yesterday, not every Kenyan was enthusiastic about this celebration. There are those that are so distraught because of the economic situation in the country. There are those that still do not have great confidence in the leadership at various levels: MCAs, governors, members of the National Assembly, senators, women representatives in this country. And that's why very few celebrated with the utility of that word and its meaning the day yesterday. But given the challenges that are rife today in the country, it must not stop us from realizing that we have come so far. Come so far, yes, in matters of institutions like the judiciary, parliament itself, and even the executive. Now, let's just put it this way. In the past, for instance, it is the executive that unilaterally used to pick chief justices and judges, etc. And after the new constitution came into effect, we saw even the hangover effect of such kind of leadership when former President Kibaki attempted to unilaterally pick former Justice retired Visram as Chief Justice, and he tested the constitution and he found it strong and firm. It tells you that for the 6 decades that this country has lived and matured, young as it is, we are making steady progress, even though there are too many challenges that we must confront through the various leadership positions and actions, policies and legislation that we must not avoid. It is President Bush in 2005 in his inauguration speech who said that the difficulty of a task must not stop our people from making tough decisions.
Okay, in relation to that, yesterday, Honorable Okero, the head of state, said the country is on a sound and stable economic footing. I just want to quote what the Controller of Budgets, Dr. Margaret Nyakango, had pointed out. And she lamented her approval of payments for public debt representing borrowed money is untraceable to actual economic activity. She said, I cannot see the things I'm paying for, and the control of budget won't be the last to call out the current spree of taxes increase and budget theft. And on taxation increases, her question was valid in this case. There lies in the dustbin of taxation theory and practice of annoying the revenue proportion, the Laffer curve LC that some repeatedly try to revive only to see the reality toss it again back into the bin. And the Treasury CS, Professor Njuguna Ndungu, who told the the Finance and National Planning Committee that we are even stretching to pay the civil servants, yet the president says the economy is on stable footing. There seems to be two different scripts in terms of how the economy is.
Obviously, the disconnect is there. You can see it. It doesn't need any what the president says and what the technocrats are saying in the ministry. But that's what I said in the beginning, that the president was trying to give a positive, positive vibes for the purpose of the celebration. But the reality in terms of the economy is different from what he said. There's no economy that has stabilized. I mean, we all know that. And the indications he gave, the indicators he looked at, inflation is down and, and so forth. But the reality is the situation is very bad in the economy, not just in the government's ability to pay its debt or the government's ability to carry out its functions effectively and promptly, but even for the lives of Kenyans. People are finding it extremely difficult to make ends meet. Business is finding it difficult to market their products, to sell. The demand is low. Purchasing power is down. I mean, there are a lot of challenges. I mean, businesses are shutting down, employees are being fired. I mean, the economic situation is pretty difficult. And I don't think the president is unaware of this. I'm sure he knows this. But I think my sense of what the president was trying to say, being stabilized, is that the IMF bailout that, is keeping the situation alive. That's probably what the president is talking about, that he's managed to get, IMF at least on board to handle some of the emergencies for him, like the upcoming Euro bond and so forth. But otherwise, in terms of the reality, the decisions that have been made are not difficult. They are bad. That's the right word. Kenyans are telling him that those economic policies are bad. And the government is insisting, no, they are not bad, but they are difficult. I think the fact remains that even when the president comes up and says, we have increased revenue, we have reduced expenditure, the reality is expenditure has increased from 3.3 trillion last year to 3.9 to 4 trillion this year. When you say you're increasing your revenue, you're not increasing revenue. Revenue is down because of the higher taxes. I mean, this is being published daily by the KRA, not meeting its targets and so forth. So I think the policies that the president, has adopted mainly, as Suba said, IMF prescriptions, which I think are not necessarily the best from our experience in the past. So I think there's a need for the government to listen. There's a need for the government to look back and see whether some of these policies they have really taken up. And one of the ones that I always talk about is that any government policy that they come up with, let's look at the medium to long term. I think this rush to try and tweak the policies overnight without looking at the financial implications, without looking at the economic implications on the cost of living and the burden to the taxpayer and so forth, I think is one of the biggest challenges of this particular administration. You want to change so many things in 1 year, and you don't. So that's why you find every government ministry coming up with its own policies, new policies throughout. NHI have come up with this one, this education policy, that Hustler Fund, this, so many things in 1 year. I think there's need for them to look back and see, to balance between the need to, this was started by the Uhuru administration, the culture to try and create a legacy. So you come up with things because you want to look good. You are looking at your own legacy. You're not looking at what is good for the country. I think there's need for the government to look at some of the policies and try and plan some of these things in the medium to long term, rather than try and squeeze things in 1 year with such an impact on the lives of Kenyans.
Yes, Suba.
Yes. I think I entirely agree that, Kenyans are likely to believe the CS for Treasury, because that's the life they are going through, those difficulties. We saw for the first time members of parliament, when Mheshimiwa is here, literally hold the leader of majority hostage I saw some even remained with his jacket, trying to bar him from entering so that there is no business. Now, that's the first time we were seeing demonstrations in Parliament. Of course, Mheshimiwa is one of those who has had an attempt to gag people from protesting. But it is good that it happened on the floor of the House. He had this weird motion about, prescribing how people should protest. And I was glad that, protest emerged from the hallowed chambers of our National Assembly. And it is as a result of those, those policies that is praising. And when you see MPs saying, no CDF, no parliament, it actually resonates with what the CS for Treasury is saying. And Kenyans, of course, know who between the two is speaking what they are living through. And I really want to say, recently 3 banks, if you want to know how dire the situation is, 3 banks declared, their profits. And all of them are banks that operate regionally across the East African region that has, expanded in the recent past. Their profit margins shrank here at home, but they made a lot of profits in Tanzania, in Sudan, in DRC, Congo, and so on. What does that tell you? That President William Ruto's policies have taxed Kenyans out of competition. And if that is the case, then what jobs is he aspiring to create? Little wonder that, we are now looking for farmhand jobs in places like Israel. We are relying on our daughters dying in Saudi Arabia for, foreign exchange and so on and so forth. There is all this over-celebrated, diaspora remittances. Yet, the civil society that I worked for over the years, attracted in the last financial year 188 billion. So rather than create an enabling environment for civil society to thrive, to attract money that is not loan, this government continues to stifle that sector, that brings money that complements its budgetary efforts in service delivery and improvement of governance. And of course, I hope I'll get a time to speak about the president's record. And generally the record for the last 60 years on governance issues that we seem not to be doing very, very well.
And he talked about the maturity of our democracy, institutions of government, which he said have evolved significantly. Parliament is now more independent than ever, he said, asserting that the organ of government now with its own calendar, budget, and as a result of this autonomy, party positions on important national issues are much more clearly defined, he said yesterday. But there are questions on Parliament hanging over the heads of Honorable Ruku and the 289 other elected members of Parliament. And when we get back from the break, I'll start with you, Honorable Ruku. Here on the broadcast, I'm sure you have a point to make, and the hashtag on X is Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. The discussion continues with Javas, Honorable Kero, Suba Churchill, and Honorable Ruku here on the broadcast. When we get back, stay tuned.